welcome to another episode of the Business of Higher Ed podcast. My name is David Fox. So today we're really fortunate to have with us an expert named Jared Gordon. Jared is the founder of Faculty of Change in Toronto. He's the managing partner, as a matter of fact. His expertise working with clients across a whole range of industry sectors is strategy, innovation, and funding, as well as fintech. They aim to discover new sources of growth and bringing fresh ideas. They're strategic renewal experts, strategic sparring partners. I thought that was a very interesting one. I really like the sober source of reasoning. I think that there are a number of institutions that could benefit, take advantage of Jared's expertise and experience. So thank you very much for joining us today, Jared.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so just to kind of build on what you said, at Faculty of Change, we deal in strategic renewal, and that's really about taking stock of where your organization excels and applying that excellence to shifting demographic, social, and cultural changes. My co-founder and business partner, Dylan Gordon, no relation, just fortunate last names. He's a trained anthropologist, and we employ kind of PhD anthropologists as well to help us understand a lot of these kind of social and cultural changes. So a great kind of depth of experience in the inner workings of higher education from that perspective. Just kind of understand what we mean by strategic renewal. You might be a mattress retailer, that's been in business for 30 years, but now you understand or want to start leading the conversation around sleep. So it's a much bigger market, a much more human need than kind of selling a mattress. And so, when we think about like a hotel brand that was about luxury to adapting to like this new reality that health is the new wealth, like educational institutions, I think have a lot of opportunity to think this through. They're very much on the front lines of a lot of the demographic shifts we're seeing in society, and can benefit from those dramatically, and provide a lot of value to students and educators alike. And so the question is just kind of understanding, trying to figure out what they're best at, and new ways to apply it to help kind of grow sustainably is what we love to do. And I think excited for kind of the conversations, because I think there's lots of opportunities here that we can kind of start talking about.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much, Jared. So one thing that I'd like to start out with is the concept of value. Mm-hmm. And in education, I think traditionally the idea was that the value is we're learning to think critically, we're becoming better able to critically analyze, or we're learning certain specific skills. But value isn't necessarily focused on equating it with money, for example. And what I'm interested to hear is, what are your thoughts on what is value, and I guess by extension, the value proposition in post-secondary education, and how can Canadian institutions rethink value creation to remain relevant, but also to remain financially sustainable?
Yeah, I think how how society has currently understood the value provided by higher education, unfortunately, is the maintenance of the wage gap between those that have graduated from higher education and those that haven't. And that wage gap has it's maintained, right? But if you start to see erosion in that wage gap, then you're going to start to see a re-questioning of value. There was a recent Pew study that says that kind of half the youth surveyed think a four-year degree is less important now than it was 20 years ago. But employers clearly don't think that, because if they did, they would pay less, right, for higher education. So truly, like, a monetary component doesn't really measure the whole value of the experience of engaging in higher education. but for a lot of people, that is kind of the most quantifiable or understandable outcome. Especially if they're the first in their family to do so. Like, if you have kind of a generational lineage of benefiting from higher education, there's a lot of like kind of passed on social mores and kind of shared experience base that, can be demonstrated through participation in higher education. Think about family loyalties to collegiate sports, right? Um, Very much kind of a shared experience of connection, identification with family members. But when you talk about actually the educational value and the learnings kind of beyond the the STEM, the science, technology, engineering, math side of the curriculum, I think that for participants who engage in them, they find them incredibly valuable. But for the rest of the world, like, there's a huge kind of gap between the actual value and perceived value of, what we would call a liberal arts education. And so, I think there's a huge opportunity there to start thinking differently about um, how do we help the world understand the value of those types of education. For myself, like, I didn't benefit from a liberal arts education. My business partners did, and a lot of the people who work in my organization have, and it's very kind of clear how they're capable of digesting, synthesizing information, producing outcomes in ways that, people who haven't had a similar kind of life experience are, would struggle to, and that how their skills are increasingly important in the age of automation as well. Like my skills, math or whatever, are very easily replaced by a calculator, and Chat GPT, but theirs are not, right?
So I want to jump off where you went on about liberal arts and the value of liberal arts, and I think we can agree. As you said, there is tremendous value. There's skill. There's just um, any number of advantages in terms of liberal arts diplomas, degrees. Um, Having said that, sometimes those liberal arts programs kind of take it on the nose, right? Like, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do after that? And the answer is really there's a lot. But we have heard of some institutions who are really struggling with their liberal arts program. So there's an example right there of how I'm interested to hear from you. How would an institution, for example, that is traditionally a liberal arts institution or has a very large liberal arts component, what might someone like the Faculty of Change, yourself, advise those institutions?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, right? And part of what you see is, when you talk about how it's not explicit, this conversation about if you enter this program, you will get this job and this income, right? It is kind of implicit in terms of the variable pricing associated with the types of degrees a school offers. You
Yeah.
can't get away charging 90, 100,000 for an MBA. I don't even know what they were. 10 years ago, they were 60 grand, right?
Right.
Unless that there is income on the back end to support that, right? But what I think
Right.
is interesting is when you think about the flight of men from higher education. In the US, colleges and universities have lost about 1.5 million students in the past couple of years. And men accounted for 71% of that loss, right? If you look at
Hmm.
professional school enrollment, it's predominantly female. And
Yep.
I would say to you that the liberal arts are actually an opportunity to re-engage men in participating in higher education. And when you think about, there's a couple things that are happening, and one is, you can read about it. There's a lot of books about it, but like they call it the crisis of men and boys, and this idea that men increasingly feel lost in society, that they don't have social networks, they're not well identifying with values and things like that, and the grounding in the great books, right? The real curriculum. There's huge movements online where people independently are getting exposed to these types of education. And sometimes
Mhm.
it can take a bit of a sinister, uh, you know, uh, a sinister or orientation, especially if it's like education by YouTube. It could lead to some kind of, and does often, radicalization. But there is an interest in philosophy. You think of the rise of Stoicism and kind of these other types of philosophy that are increasingly consumed by men on their own, but they're not going to philosophy as a course of education through university. And so, really what does liberal arts education do is that it's like, I think it is durable in a world
Mm.
where we experience increasing amounts of change. Like, it creates kind of that self-learning capability and attitude that allows you to continually adapt to shifting economic needs and, global kind of climate and geopolitical orientations. Like, it just makes you more flexible. And so I think that there's an opportunity to bridge the gap between what men are, what men are not currently finding in higher education, and the opportunities enabled by liberal arts.
From that, what I would take is institutions really focus on recruiting and engaging men in these programs, as well as other students, obviously. But
Yeah,
if there are some concrete steps, 2, 3,
yeah,
that you might see a liberal arts program or a liberal arts institution in Canada taking to try to compete, to try to continue to compete,
yeah.
what might be some ideas?
I think that, what universities have long, an area that they have often overlooked is what they are uniquely good at, right?
Yeah.
There's kind of this overall understanding that we're good at research, or that we provide an opportunity for growth and maturation and education for our students, that we shape, good members of civil society, all this kind of stuff, right? They feel very generalized. But, the question being is, I went to Western, so I'll use them as an example, right? If Western University did not exist, what would realistically be different? Those children or students would get an education elsewhere. They'd just be absorbed into other schools, right? It's not like people would go uneducated. Not like maybe research would go on unperformed, and then that's really interesting to kind of think about. So like what would be really hurt, or whose growth would be severely limited by the absence of that specific educational institution? And once you get that, you kind of get a bit of a sense of the differentiated value. And that's really where you can start kind of leaning into some of these cultural changes. Like, how can we apply that value to, to these changes, be they demographic, social, or cultural shifts? And I think that universities or higher ed in total, whether it be colleges, universities, whatever format, they kind of haven't taken that, right? It's been a bit of a competitive game of growing kind of share at the expense of other institutions or forms of education. How do we attract students who might elsewhere have gone to A, B, C, or D here? And that's interesting in a way, but really kind of, growing the overall pie and finding new sources of growth
Right.
aren't going to come from stealing students away from other forms of education. They're going to be through creating new and differentiated value that both students and the market think is interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
think the last development along this line was continuing education and executive programming, right? That was the last time that someone really came up with something new and meaningful in a way that kind of grew the overall market share and attainable market of kind of the educational communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question being is like, what is the next version of, beyond kind of reinvigorating the core as well? Like, is there another version of continuing education available out there?
I think the first point you made is really, really important. I think institutions, in my opinion, need to do more of this, which is taking a step back and saying, what do we do really well. What do we do really well? What can we do really well? We're not going to be able to offer the full menu of options because then we're going to offer average as opposed to great. And so, what can we do that we do really well? What do we do really well? Is there something that we could do just a little bit more? And that would be something we do really well. Then who wants that? Who wants that? What's the value that they're willing to pay for that?
Mhm.
And where are they? And then let's go get them. In higher education, right now, we've got a bit of a stagnated financial situation. Actually, rising to the level of crisis
Mhm.
at some institutions. I'm wondering about innovation at a time of more limited resources. So, what strategic renewal or approaches, sorry, would you suggest, or would you think about, or discuss with the client, uh, be pursued to try to adapt and thrive, recognizing that the road is kind of bumpy here in terms of resources.
Yeah, I mean, we focus on the fact that the majority of organizations have existing capabilities that can be applied to new opportunities.
Mm,
We're not in the business of telling companies that they need to go and hire, 300 software engineers to become a data analysis company or build a new plant, with brand new tooling to solve problem A, B, C, and D. Rather that our history has told us, or engaging with clients, it's kind of always told us there's always something that is meaningful and impactful. And the world has changed since you've developed a certain excellence and set of capabilities. Like you wouldn't still be here as an organization unless you were good at something, right? And you wouldn't be in crisis or thinking about that unless the relevancy of that excellence has shifted or reduced. You know, like the person in the world who was the best at making buggy whips and wagon wheels clearly has a skill set that's applicable in a world of cars, you know? And I'm not suggesting the university is in the buggy whip business, but, let's focus more on that than, opening up a whole new campus devoted to A, B, C, and D, which is something you've never done before, unless the
mm.
skill of opening up new campuses is your primary differentiated skill set. But I don't know if that is the case for any kind of schools of higher education. It's like, let's figure out new ways to kind of drive change and improve growth through kind of what we already have. Um, I think that when you think about a lot of the assets that university or higher education kind of has access to, things like people, real estate, accumulated bodies and knowledge, existing kind of relationships, ability to deliver government services. Like there's a whole host of things that higher education does really well, and that the rest of the world around them has changed, and that they haven't yet capitalized on some of those opportunities.
That leads me to talking about leadership. Okay. And I think there's a traditional model, a traditional way that leaders in academic institutions have come up through the ranks. Now we have any number of changes. Let's just use AI for an example. Um, AI is constantly evolving, right? What it can do, how it can be harnessed, and we want we want leaders who, in this example, not only say, "Oh yeah, we've got to have AI because everyone else has AI," but we've got to have leaders who are saying, this is a unique perspective on AI. This is a unique program involving AI that ties into what we do. Can you speak about the demands of, let's say, a new era of leaders and what you see those leaders as having to have?
Yeah. I think the AI conversation is interesting and particularly germane. If you think about like the leading voice on the application of AI to business problems, um, it's not a McKinsey or Accenture consultant. It's not, Sam Altman or Satya Nadella. Like, it's not any of these people. Rather, it's a professor at Wharton named Ethan Mollick. He publishes kind of the most read newsletter. He's courted by all the big AI companies to try their products first. And he's blogging constantly every week about opportunities for both educational institutions, but also traditional businesses to apply kind of AI to solve business problems. He led a large scale study with BCG where it enabled the consultants with AI tools to see how it improves their workplace. Like, you know, this type of work and thinking is currently happening within people who have traditional backgrounds as they relate to the institutions that they're a part of. But where it starts to get interesting is when you think about some of these more external orientations that some people have versus others. And like I think, there is huge amounts of institutional knowledge that kind of get built into when you work at an organization that have been in businesses or have been in existence as long as most higher educational institutions. And where hiring externally is likely, it's incredibly risky given
Hmm.
the amount of knowledge, lore or whatever have you, that's like in place there, right? But the question being is this, and how do you cultivate candidates who are not, bogged down by that same lore or history, old ways of doing things. This is a very kind of common question of, how, if we think of it as a bit of a succession challenge too, like how many businesses fail
Hmm.
or get sold within 5 years of the founder kind of moving on, it's north of 50%. But I would say that comes from uh, the way to mitigate those types of challenges or bad strategy directions that could result in bankruptcies and the like is providing kind of uh, two things, like training opportunities for those inside of institutions to level up their skills, and B, ensuring your criteria for recognition and advancement are reflective of the kind of skills that you will need to be successful kind of 10, 15 years from now, not what you might need right now, to kind of be reflective of having people with the right skill sets in the right positions when the time comes, right? Like a lot of the criteria that people are evaluated on for the success of their job that governs their advancement is very this quarter, next quarter, or this semester, next
Yes.
semester, next year, right? Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
fine, but like the person who's a manager today, a senior director tomorrow, I don't know what the equivalent, a department head, in 5 years, and potentially a university president in 10 years, is still only being valued on how they deliver against next semester's outcomes, which I think is foolish because you have to understand that it takes
Mm-hmm.
time for them to advance up the roles, and you need to be kind of nurturing those key skills earlier on rather than trying to make those decisions from a limited pool of vice presidents to senior vice presidents.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you see leadership in asking for your opinion here? Do you see leadership in higher education moving more towards the MBA?
I have only seen the situations where I've seen people like that been effective, been like that, be people who demonstrate operational capabilities and commitment to operational excellence, is only in situations where the organization itself has a clear overarching purpose that they can lean into, draft into, and align the teams and capabilities of the organization around. If an organization is floundering, or whose purpose is no longer relevant in the market, or whose purpose is not clearly understood or communicated and shared by its team, someone like that often struggles in getting everyone moving in the same direction. They find their tenures tend to be dominated by fixing problem after problem, moving from crisis to crisis. Um, but at the end of the day, they haven't moved the institution forward substantially from when they have started. Like true transformational leadership um, in my opinion, kind of requires a certain level of vision
Hmm.
and orientation, ability to kind of commit, communicate, align people around that vision, and then attract and retain talent that can execute. Has the business side of higher education been neglected, for too long? I think that might be institution, but like you're probably quite likely, and I think that's just because, I'm an N of one, but I'm an educated consumer, but I can't tell you, I can give you a rough sense of, I've heard good things about the following colleges and programs at the various universities, but like, there's no differentiated, it's difficult to understand differentiated brand or a set of core capabilities in these universities. There's no, it's not like
Right.
U of T is Nike and York is Apple, or, if you were to do like that traditional strategist exercise of mapping these universities to kind of other brands, you wouldn't get consistent answers. And similarly, if any one of these institutions were to disappear, um, I find it unclear as a consumer, a consumer being a hirer of graduates, as to what I would be missing.
Mm.
And I think that, if there was a university president or leader on the higher education side who could very clearly make that case, then things would start to get really, really interesting.
It's,
I mean, you can disagree with me because you're in it more than I am.
yeah,
If there are, and I think, there probably are kind of shining light exemplars, but maybe.
I did my undergraduate in the United States,
Mhm.
and the United States, particularly in New England, a lot of the idea of what is your value proposition, what happens if you're gone, uh, is something that is closer to them in terms of them being able to try to explain that, being able to demonstrate that. In Canada, as a collective, I think most institutions offer, a solid, a very good education. Then you see these. I'm a Western grad too. You see a place like the Ivy School of Business,
Mhm.
where they are clearly, they're at another level, and they have taken approaches and strategies to say, hey, this is what we do. This is what we do really well. And this is why you want to come here. I
Mhm.
think there are people at schools who will tell you that. I think there's people at schools who can give you their own answer.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure that I could necessarily pull something and read, uh,
Yeah.
material. The school I went to, we train business leaders. That's what
Mhm.
we do.
Yeah.
No liberal arts, no, and that's just the way they are. Since
Mhm.
1815, we train business leaders. So I think there is room. I think there is room for that. I think some of it happens. I think it's not necessarily made as public as, in my opinion, it should be. But I also think there is a lot of room for institutions to be much more deliberate in that exercise than they are now. And I think that those institutions that do that um, are going to find themselves in a better position to not just survive, but to thrive. A school, let's say, uh, one of these schools in a smaller community offers solid, uh, arranged liberal arts, some business, some science. It's not a huge institution. One of these institutions comes to you and says, we're a good school. We've got great professors. We've got a beautiful campus. We've got really nice facilities. We're having problems. We're having problems filling our seats. We're having problems uh, we've got sports, we've got all these different things, but people want to go to Toronto. People want to go to larger centers. What is the process you would take, just as an example? What is the process you would take that institution through in terms of strategic renewal, branding, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, that an organization like that has the freedom to be very specialized in a way that larger organizations might not, and they traditionally could see that as a limiting factor. But the fact is that where a Western needs to acquire, what is it, 10,000, 20,000 new students a year? Acquiring 1,000 or less students a year means that you can be very specific in acquiring the right kinds of students for you and your community. You know, if you're saying to me or coming to us and suggesting, well, we can't compete with Toronto, then you can't compete with students. You're never going to be able to offer whatever it is, the reason why people want to be in Toronto. Be it kind of cultural programming, social life, type of social life, whatever, but then flip it on its head. Like, what is it that people who don't want to be in Toronto want? And how do we become more competitive there? Like, why do they not want Toronto? And how can we emphasize that? You know, Integration into small societies, fear of getting lost, like lost meaning being a number versus a human, right? Like all these different kinds of things that smaller institutions can offer in our competitive advantages. And so our process is kind of fairly simple. Like we really just try and understand what the problem is behind the problem. So you say low enrollment or whatever it is, or struggles in attracting students, and then there's often a bigger problem than that. And we engage in two sets of research. One is ethnographic, so leveraging our PhD trained anthropologists to go out and really get a sense of what people value, and people being specifically like this more narrow target rather than the whole world, but like what is the actionable group that we're targeting, what is important to them. And then we also do a forward-looking orientation called strategic foresight to kind of see what's changing. How is the world going to change 5, 10 years from now? And lastly, we create these things we call growth platforms, which are the areas where the commercial opportunity overlaps with your capabilities and the current and evolving unmet needs of your market. So, when we worked with this mattress retailer to help them become a leader in sleep, there was a couple of key observations. One was that people care about their sleep. Sleep is important to them. They want to sleep better, to be healthier, all this kind of stuff, to sleep well, to stay well. And then that creates a whole new opportunity for markets, for products and services. Everything from pillows, sheets, and candles to supplements and eye masks, maybe even CPAP machines in the future, right? Fine. That's okay. But also, the business of sleep, there's a lot of new companies coming around, and then some of, as a legacy company, you might have 8 distribution centers, 10 distribution centers. So you can more cost effectively deliver a mattress than somebody else. And so, this company specifically, Sleep Country, like they were working with, delivering Casper mattresses. They eventually bought Casper because the logistics to a Casper was so important that, they had a capability that these new upstart brands could never duplicate. And so, there's all these opportunities for investigation of what it is that you do that a constantly changing world creates new opportunities for relevance in. Like, I would love to engage in the opportunity to figure out how to drive increased relevance in renewal at a small size educational institution. Because, it's a lot simpler than one of these kinds of larger urban schools. I think our two other examples, just quickly, that kind of drive the point home are the growth and adoption of co-op programs. As a method to expansion of co-op beyond kind of engineering technical schools as a method of alleviating kind of job placement anxiety and getting job experience. And I think an oft underlooked one is the rise of exchange. Exchange programs, cultural immersions, and travel opportunities. With an increased desire for travel experiences and others, Exchange is particularly interesting. The other thing, I mean, from a crass kind of marketer's orientation, Exchange generates a lot of content on behalf of your students are constantly generating content while on Exchange. Find that it's lifestyle
Yeah.
content, but it's enabled by an opportunity created by the higher educational institution. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a very interesting missed opportunity to kind of say, look, I'm here in Barcelona because I'm here, in Copenhagen because I'm here in Hong Kong because, the subtext being that this could be you too, if only you went to school at,
Yeah.
etc. No one's generating content of them, making light bulbs on the shop floor, but they are of, the beaches of Barcelona or the noodle bars of Tokyo. And the question being is how do you really kind of help people make the case that that was enabled by the choices, the lifestyle choice or the educational choices that they made, and that you too could have that as
I
well.
actually just spoke with somebody in another area where I think Canadian institutions can do more if they decide they are going to do more, which is sport. Normally, I ask our guests if they could provide one piece of strategic advice to the higher education institutions.
No, I think that's right. I think it's just, try and imagine a world without you. Like I said, I think is maybe the most um, specific one. And, try and lean into all those things that it is that you bring to your communities and your students and your employees as well.
Well, thank you very much, Jared, for
Thanks, David.
sharing your expertise. Jared's bio will be in the comments below. If you like what we're doing here, the content, please subscribe, like, leave comments. If you have ideas for new podcasts, let us know. Anyway, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks.